is TPO? TPO is basically the pecking order, started in 2019. This is 2023, so this was supposed to be the fourth launch, but it was a bit delayed. And what are we looking? We are assessing iconic food brands and food service companies. I want us to agree. We are assessing what? We are assessing these guys, food brands and food service companies, that on how they're dealing with chicken welfare throughout the supply chain. Yeah? And remember that maybe I should have said animal welfare has certain requirements that we need to be looking at. And there are 5 fundamental freedoms around this, which we can discuss after this. In 2022, which is last year, we then said it is not good enough to just assess the iconic brands. And the iconic brands, so that we are all together, are the big 8 fast food restaurants. One of them is actually in Kampala called KFC. Yeah? There are others. Beyond KFC, there is Burger King, there's Burger King, there is Insco, no, not Insco, Subway, there is, anyway, we'll see them, but there are about 8 of them. So those are the ones we were looking at. But beyond that, then we said, let's not just look at what the international brands are doing, let's also look at what our local brands are doing. And you'll see that in the report here, we have brands like Cafe CJ's that we've included, because that's our local brand. It operates both in Kenya and in Uganda. So that we start saying, what are some of these things that we need to be looking at? So that's why we did in 2022, we had evaluating how international and national fast food brands are managing broiler welfare and their commitments around that. Very simple. I also want to make it very clear, we do not interview them. In the methodology, what we are saying is we do not come and ask you questions. Like my good friends, if you are from Yamo Chicks, we do not go to Yamo Chicks and say, how are you producing chickens? No. What we do, we have 13 questions, and what we simply do is go online and find out what commitments you put in this, how those 13 questions. We look at, do you have battery cage systems? Are you using them? Then we give you a score. Do you have commitments on animal welfare, and what commitments have you made on animal welfare? Then we give you a score. Because the idea is we don't want to hear from you, because if you are doing the right thing, we should be able to see from you either your annual report or from your website, and I'll give you certain websites that you can look at what they have already said in terms of commitments. And so we are talking about commitments and targets, and we are talking about performance reporting. Are they reporting? Are they saying, for instance, that out of our production system, 50% of our production system is using a fast-growing breed or a slow-growing breed. 50% of our production is on deep litter systems with enough litter, because that is critical. 30% of our production system is having very good feed and very good ventilation. So that's what we are evaluating based on what the organization does. But because we don't want to fail you, so that you don't say we were evaluated without knowing, we actually give you a warning. So like in this case, in April last year, we wrote to all the 10 companies, the African 10 companies that we were going to re-evaluate, and told them, in June, we will be doing an evaluation on animal welfare commitments, policies, and your performance. Please, either, one, upload all these things onto your website so that they are readily available for the person, the consultant who's going to be evaluating, or if you feel that you don't want to load them because people tell me there are things called trade secrets, send them to us so that you can evaluate. So that's how we started. Then we did the evaluation in June. Then around September, we sent out the initial evaluation back to the companies and told them, this is what we found out. We reviewed your website, we reviewed the documentation you sent us, and this is how you've scored you. Then if they said they felt something was missing, they were supposed to come back and say, hey, Dr. Yamo, your team didn't see this, that's on our website, or because our mother company sitting in the US, like KFC, has this policy, it applies to us or it doesn't apply to us. So that's how we do the evaluation. Are we agreed? Is it clear? Okay. Then the commitments, as I said, there is pillar 1, which is commitment and targets. The questions here focus on published time-bound bond commitments. It's about saying that by the year 2030, we will be having a stocking density of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 30 kilograms or 20 kilograms, whatever it is. Our current stocking density is this, but we want to face it to this. For those who are chicken experts, you know that in Europe, stocking density has gone up to 42 kilograms per meter squared. But now European law is saying what? That you cannot put chickens beyond 30 kilograms per meter squared. Why are they reducing that stocking density? Those are the questions we need to ask ourselves. And those are some of the things that we need to consistently look at. Then the other thing we are also looking at is the other, and we'll again show you those other things, the other aspects that we're looking at. But beyond having those things published, we are also saying you need to be evaluating them on an annual basis and saying, this year we had 30% of our stocking density wrong, but we are improving on it and something like that. So now to then say, be very specific on the criteria we are using so that we understand each other. There are about 6 or 7 criteria that we'll use. The first one we are saying, no chicken should be in any cage, whether it's a broiler or whether it's a layer. But since this was more related towards broilers, I think in the African context, we don't have big challenges with broilers. I have in my travel across Africa, I'm yet to find a producer that is putting broilers in battery cage systems. So that's something that we need to be very wary of. The second thing is that in every 24-hour cycle, chickens must have periods of darkness. When I was a young man, we used to grow broilers with 24 hours of light. The challenge with 24 hours is to assimilate the feed it's eating. Essentially what happens is the feed just goes through the animal. And that's why good dairy farmers feed manure from chicken houses to cows, because it has a lot of nutrients, because the animal has not gotten time to manage that process effectively. As in the tropics, I think that the same situation in Uganda is you are on naturally ventilated open-sided chicken houses. So you are using natural light. And natural light is way above 50 lux. And it shouldn't be a problem in the African context. Enrichment is a challenge because what we tend to do in our production system is we have these big chicken houses or pig houses that has litter. We do not allow the bird to have patches, and patches are things like this. You can see in this chicken house, there's this patching where the chicken can jump and patch, or you can use haystacks where the chicken can patch and jump. When I talk about these things in the Kenyan context, which I think is the same thing in Uganda, a lot of people say, a broiler shouldn't jump. Anytime it jumps onto something, it's burning energy, so it's not growing as fast as it should. Its job should be to eat, drink, and grow fat, so that we are able to slaughter it in about 42 days or between 35 to 42 days. True or false? 30 to 35. 35, 42. Okay, there is competition here. There's 30 to 35, 35 to 42. Whichever you want to. The reality is the world is saying the broiler is growing too fast. And that's why the world is also beginning to say we want to gradually phase out fast-growing broilers. So those companies that are here and are using COB 500, your time span to use COB 500 might be the next 5 to 10 years. Then they'll be phased out. The question we need to pose to ourselves, what will we use as the alternative? And internationally, they already recognized slow-growing breeds. The Sasso, the Ken Bros of this world. So I can see people in industry know these things. Yeah, so that's one of the things we are looking at. Then I talked about stocking density maximum 30 kilograms per meter squared. So essentially for those of us who are not very clear about these things, what we are saying is, if your chicken is growing, in Uganda chickens grow to how many kilos live weight?
1.8.
Broilers, I'm talking about broilers.
1.8.
Depends on the age.
Uh-huh.
So from around 1.5
1.5
to 2.5.
to 2.5 kgs. I'll take the middle level, 2 kilos. Assuming that your broiler is growing to 2 kilos at the point of slaughter, then we are saying 30 kilograms divided by 2 kilos is how many? is 15. Then you are saying in your stocking density in your chicken house, you cannot keep more than 15 birds per meter squared. That is true? That's true. Yeah, so you see, I told you I know these things. I've been around these chicken things long enough. So that's what you are saying, that you cannot. But remember, Europe had grown to the level where they were using up to 42 kilos, which means they could keep 21 birds per meter squared. What Africans fail to remember is that Europe is a temperate land, we are in the tropics. Europe uses pressure ventilated chicken houses so they can control the environment. We can't because we are doing naturally ventilated chicken houses. But even with that mechanization, Europe is saying, and now it's law, that you shouldn't keep chickens more than 30 kilograms per meter squared. So they are moving back to where Africa is, but Africa is trying to move to where they're coming from. The challenge has been, because of that intensification, you have issues with climate change. Remember, even chickens produce the carbon gases, so that methane, so that's one of the things. The second thing, because of a lot of intensification, you have a lot of animals in a small space, so they're able to exchange viruses, and you end up with antigenic shifts, which then causes problems, and that's what led to pandemics, the swine flus and the avian influenzas that we are looking at. So those are the challenges that we are looking, why these things are becoming important. Then in a good production system, you must have deep litter. Yeah? And the litter must be at least 4 inches. If it's less than 4 inches, the chicken doesn't have enough to scratch and doesn't have enough to dust bathe, and that gives challenges to the chicken. Maybe I should have said the reason why these things are important, scratching, dust bathing, patching, is because it exercises the chickens, the broilers' muscles, and that leads to good muscle development, which gives you a good quality product. If the animal doesn't exercise, the muscle doesn't grow as well as it's supposed to be, and you end up with a relatively poor product. And that's the things that we are. And then, of course, last but not least, I have talked about this. We are saying globally that we need to slow the rate of growth for chickens. It should not go beyond 50 grams per day. Okay? That's the international standards. So these are the questions we were looking at and how you are performing against them. And that's what we were then using to assess. Now, depending on how well you are, in 2022, the ranges were this. We had a 6-tier grading system, with the best being 86 to 100%, and the worst being very poor in 2020, being 0 to 25, and then poor being 26 to. So essentially what we did, if you can notice this, is that anything below 50% was considered very poor or poor. Unlike in the year before, where anything below 50% was getting as high as grade 3. So that's another shift, but I think we need to concentrate here because this is the first time we are doing it, looking at local systems. Then this is the kind of companies that we assess. So there's Burger King, there's Domino's, KFC, McDonald's, Nando's, Pizza Inn, Starbucks, and Subway. Those are the eight leading, they are called iconic brands. Those are the biggest food companies globally, especially around fast food restaurants. So those are the big 8. In Uganda, you only have KFC. All right? Yeah. So what are the key findings? We are saying that in Pillar 1, which was looking at policies and whatever is in place, 15% of the organizations, of the food companies, the total was 95, excluding the 8. Remember I said we also had local brands across the world that were looked into. So in 15% of the organizations were in Pillar 1. There was nothing in Pillar 2, Pillar 3, and in Tier 2, Tier 3, and Tier 4 in terms of Pillar 1. A big chunk, almost 85% of the organizations were poor or very poor. So that simply means that a lot of companies have not made commitments. The best performing companies in the world were KFC Germany and KFC France. So your KFC here has certain things that we need to look and hold them responsible for. In terms of overall performance, as I said, KFC Germany, KFC France were Tier 1, Tier 2. Then there were 11 companies in Tier tier 4, 6 companies in tier 5, and a big proportion in tier 6. And again, when you get the report, you can look at the companies that are listed. So we are saying 15% of the companies were ranked in tier 1s in terms of commitments and targets. Generally, performance reporting was poorly done across all countries. The highlight is that companies are beginning to make commitments but fail to do the performance. So if you go to their website, you'll find the commitments, but they're not evaluating their performance every year. And that is something that we would need to work on. And that's why we said international franchises are also operating in Kenya are also ranked, and most of them failed. So there's clearly a disconnect between what is happening internationally and what's happening at the Africa level that becomes critical and important. So just to give you examples and to look at the 8 companies, Burger King, Domino's, KFC, McDonald's, Nando's, Pizza Hut, Starbucks, and Subway, you can see the yellow mark, which is pillar 2, is missing in a lot of them, which means they are not reporting. They have the right, as you can see, Subway has scored almost 50% in terms of the policies being in place, but they scored 0 in terms of performance evaluation, and that is something that we are going to be picking and having a discussion with them on how we do performance evaluation. The only ones that tend to have performance evaluations were KFC and McDonald's. You can see KFC had a pillar 2 that's almost 15%, which is something to show that they're making certain efforts around, and this is the global average, looking at all the 15 or 16 places that we are in. So in terms of commitments, the largest commitments globally in the chicken industry is that people do not want to use cages. Almost 37% of the organizations that we evaluated across board said they do not want to use cages, or they do not use cages, and that is something they put on their website. And that's why I was telling you a good example. Your good friends down the road this side called Carrefour are saying by 2026 they will not be accepting eggs from battery cage systems. So that is something that is important. The next big thing that they're doing is they're doing third-party auditing. If you want to supply Carrefour today, they will come and audit your farm, or they'll send somebody to come to audit your farm. I have done some of those audits for them. So that's what we are calling third-party audits. None of these fellows are going to buy anything from you directly. They will audit you. They'll have certain requirements that you have to meet around the same things that we are talking about. The next big thing, which is almost 25%, was how do you slaughter that animal? It must be humane without the bird suffering. So again, something that industry is working around. Then the next one is enrichment, then slow-growing breeds, then stocking density. So you can see the world is relatively moving at the same pace. They're saying birds must be given enough space, they shouldn't be growing too fast, they should have things in the chicken house enrichment that allows the chicken to be a chicken. It can scratch, it can peck, it can do all those things, but ultimately you also must slaughter them in a humane manner, and these things should be audited by third party, but the biggest one is avoiding cages. So in terms of commitments in Pillar 1, 56% of the companies have a chicken welfare policy or a commitment. So 56% of all the 95 organizations we looked at have some level of commitment, including the African ones. Yeah, 38% of them published a commitment to avoid cages, so cages was the biggest, and 28% of them were going to be audited by third parties, and 25% humane slaughter. Remember, things like humane slaughter are also driven by laws. I know in Uganda there is a meat control act that tells you how you slaughter an animal, how you stand the animal, etc. So some of these things are also legal requirements, and that's why we engage governments around some of these things. Yeah, in terms of performance in reporting, 18% of the companies are reporting on how many cages they have in their production systems. It is followed by enrichment, and then the rest of them, about 8%, are reporting on stocking density, growing breeds, and third-party audits, and humane slaughter. So again, reporting is starting, but it's still at a very low level, and we need to see whether we can push it higher in the coming few days into this year. Yeah, and that's exactly what I've said. performance reporting globally is poor, and we need to work around that. So again, if you look at countries, and then Kenya in this case, because next year we hope there'll be Uganda and Tanzania in this bigger spread. But you see Kenya, they still, pillar 1, there's some level of reporting. There's no pillar 2, but there's some overall then, overall is very easy, it's the average between the 2 pillars. You just add the scores of the 2 pillars and divide by 2. And as we said, the best performing countries are France and Germany. Spain is somewhere around there. The States, if you look at commitments, is also there. Italy, and then Australia, Brazil, and Canada at the other levels. A lot of the third world countries were struggling. But anyway, not only third world countries, even Croatia and Europe had lower scores than Kenya had actually. So it cuts both ways. So if we look at country performance, we are saying that European countries dominated the overall performance of the 2 pillars, Germany being the best at 37%, France at 36% overall, and that is something that we need to emulate and work around. But now let's look at specifically Africa. That was the bigger global picture. What does it look like in Africa? And Africa in this case is represented by Kenya, because that's where we were able to do. This year we will do, and one of the messages you need to go out with is that this year the assessment will include Ugandan and Tanzania and Kenyan brands, because we are moving into East Africa, so that then we compare what's happening. And preferably we tend to look at organizations that are in 2 or 3 countries, so that we are looking at, when you say Cafe CJs, for instance, it's in Kenya and it's in Tanzania, so that gives us a good basis. When you look at supermarkets, Carrefour is in Kenya and etc. When you look at fast food restaurants, Java is also here, it is in Rwanda, and it's a Kenyan brand. So that's what we are looking at, ideally. So when you look at this, then the highlights that I want to say, and you can see all the people we looked at, Farmer's Choice, Kenchik, these are producers, and QMP, Quality Meat Packers, those are big producers. Farmer's Choice is more of pigs, QMP is a mix, Kenchik is chicken. Then supermarkets were Carrefour, Chandarana, Naivas, and Quickmart. Those are the big 4 supermarkets in Kenya. So this coming year, I want to add some supermarkets from Uganda, the big ones. And then the others, Burger King is in Kenya, Cafe CJ's, Domino's, Java House, KFC, Pizza Hut, Simbisia, and Subway. Simbisia is actually a Zimbabwean brand that is across 19 African countries. Yeah? So what are we saying? We are saying that a lot of them had nothing to report, which is meaning it's early days, which is good. We are starting to engage them. We are now working closely with Farmer's Choice and QMP. Carrefour we've worked with for a while. Kenchik has scored very well, because last year when we launched the report, they were in a meeting like some of you are here from the industry, and they quickly realized that for them to get into high value markets, the KFCs of Kenya and the Cafe CJs and the Burger Kings, they needed to do that. That's why then they made certain commitments. If you go to the Kenchik website, you'll find an animal welfare policy, a food safety policy, disposal of waste policy, an antimicrobial antibiotic use policy. In fact, the antibiotic use policy has been recognized globally as one of the top 8 leading managers of antibiotics in production systems. So this to me is not worrying. It just says it's early days and the opportunities to do certain work with people who are willing and interested. Yeah? So we assessed 3 local producers, 3 local restaurants, and 4 retailers alongside the international brands in the Kenyan perspective. And this I've already said, Kenchik was the best performing company with 42% score average, but they had 83% in terms of commitments, showing that whatever they developed last year in fact beat a lot of the big boys, because their commitments were relatively well thrashed out. They are followed by Carrefour, which is a big supermarket. And Carrefour, remember that the African franchise is owned by a Dubai operation called Futain Al Mutain. But the interesting thing is that the international fast food brands, the Burger Kings, the Subways, the KFCs that are in Nairobi are not adhering even to the standards that they've developed in their home country. So KFC was a very interesting one. That in Nairobi they don't have any standards, but globally they have standards that they need to be adhering. So one of the discussions we are having with them is how do you domesticate some of those standards, because the African consumer is as critical just like the rest of the consumers elsewhere. So the recommendations as I conclude, number one is that local food companies should endeavor to meet farms. And again, this one you can Google this and it will take you to a website where there is farm animal responsible minimum standards that you can then look at. For people who are producers, that's the benchmark. If you want to sell your products across the world, you need to at least meet farm animal responsible minimum standards for trade. The second one is that we as World Animal Protection are saying if you want help to do some of these things, we are available. We have the expertise. We've worked with companies across the whole world. So we are able to help you and guide you in developing these minimum standards that then may align to what the rest of the world is looking at. We're also saying food companies with animal welfare policies and commitments should start reporting performance. Remember that the challenge is that they're not reporting performance. They're just putting standards on their website, but they're not reporting how well they're doing against those standards, which is a requirement. Number three, we are saying international food companies with animal welfare policies and commitments in other regions should strive to domesticate. So it will be interesting next year to find out whether KFC in Uganda is meeting the standards globally from KFC headquarters in the US, because that's what we are saying. They should not be having a set of standards for Africa and a different set of standards for international markets. Then we're also saying that government has a role to play. And one of the things we are saying is government needs to review and develop certain legislation. In this country, there's a piece of legislation that was put together before some of us were born, called the Animals Prevention of Cruelty Act, Cap 220. That act is as old as the Kenyan one, Prevention of Cruelty Act, Cap 360 in Kenya. They are acts that we inherited from the British colonial masters when they left. The world has moved slightly ahead, but we are still using these pieces, old pieces of legislation. The interesting thing is that we are not even aware what those pieces of legislation say. And if I wanted to harass Ugandan producers, I could easily use that piece of legislation. Because, for instance, it says that it is illegal to starve, underfeed, or thirst an animal. Did you know that? Section 3 of this act says that. It says it is illegal to keep an animal in a verminous chicken house. Yet when I walk around Uganda, a lot of your chicken houses don't meet hygiene standards. Yeah? It says it is illegal to transport an animal in a way that doesn't cater for its health and welfare. But every time I come into Uganda, I see chickens on motorbikes upside down. I see cows with their tails tied to the roof of... I've been around, my good friends. Don't think I don't know. Yeah? Yeah, I can give you photos. Yeah? Yeah, so part of our challenge is the act is old, but it has certain provisions that we are not even looking at. Yeah, and implementing. And that then ruins our quality of products and gives us challenges in our production systems. So those are some of the things we are saying. And of course, we'll engage the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries. My good friends in the veterinary profession, we've had discussions around some of these things to then say, how do we move Uganda to the next level? Because when the international markets come, those are some of the things we evaluate when you're doing risk management. What does the law say? What does the policy say? This law, this piece of legislation, if you go and look at it, it says the minister at the time being will develop regulations on transportation. I am still looking for regulations of transportation attached to this that says that if I'm transporting chickens, I should put how many in a crate and how many should I, how frequent should I stop, and should I feed them or not feed them, should I water them or not water them when I'm going to the processing plant. The same to the pig industry. And those are some of the things that are becoming critical. And ladies and gentlemen, that in a nutshell is the Pecking Order 2022. Iko maswali, or that's my mother tongue. Are there questions? You need to teach me how to say